Hey guys, welcome back to the YouTube channel for the Renaissance English History Podcast. I am your host, Heather. I've been podcasting on Tudor England since 2009 with my show, which makes it the original Tudor History Podcast. This channel is where I put all of my episodes from all of my shows, as well as loads of extra content like this video right here. Today, we are going to talk about the Wizard Earl. There was a Wizard Earl, and we're going to talk about him. Henry Percy, the 9th Earl of Northumberland. Last week, we talked about his wife, Dorothy Devereux, Dorothy Percy, and I mentioned him being the Wizard Earl, and there were some comments saying, oh, let's talk about the Wizard Earls. Before we get started, though, if you want to see more Tudor history in your YouTube feed, go ahead and hit subscribe so you never miss a video that we put out. All right, let's get into it and talk about, I just like saying it, the Wizard Earl. It's just fun to say. All right. Henry Percy, he was the 9th Earl of Northumberland. He's not a name that pops up very often in the big moments of Tudor and Stuart history, but I think he probably should be because he's fascinating. Henry was one of the wealthiest aristocrats of his time. He was an early champion of science and alchemy. His life is full of contrasts. He was a man with one foot in the world of noble privilege and another in the realm of intellectual exploration. He also had a connection to the Gunpowder Plot, which landed him in the Tower, and his story becomes even more intriguing. So Henry was born April 1564 at Tynemouth Castle in Northumberland to one of England's most prestigious families. His father was the 8th Earl of Northumberland. He was a Protestant, and Henry followed suit, though the Percys, of course, had very deep Catholic roots, and that would come back to haunt him later. Even as a young man, he was drawn to intellectual pursuits. He studied under the Vicar of Egremont, learning not only religion, but also developing an early interest in science. In 1585, his father died. He inherited the earldom. He gained significant wealth and influence. In 1594, he married Dorothy Devereux, who was the sister of Robert Devereux, the 2nd Earl of Essex. That's the person we talked about last week. There was Penelope Devereux, Robert Devereux, who became Elizabeth's favorite before he then tried to rebel against her, and Dorothy. And this marriage, of course, connected him to another wealthy family, but their marriage was far from happy. The couple eventually separated, but the marriage did produce a male heir, Algernon Percy, who was very active on the parliamentarian side in the Civil War a couple of decades later. So the Percy lineage continued. Henry's fascination with the natural world earned him the nickname the Wizard Earl. He built one of England's largest private libraries at Sion House, filled it with works on alchemy, astronomy, and mathematics. His home became a meeting place for some of the era's greatest thinkers. Among them was Thomas Hariot, a brilliant scientist who worked as a tutor and a collaborator with Walter Raleigh, who also did lots of experiments. Hariot made groundbreaking observations of the moon using a telescope months before Galileo did, and even sketched sunspots. Henry also surrounded himself with a circle of intellectuals and explorers, including John Dee, the renowned astrologer and mathematician. These connections gave rise to rumors about the so-called School of Night, a group of thinkers allegedly dabbling in the esoteric and pushing the boundaries of science and philosophy. Now, this group was probably not particularly formalized. People who think similar things like to get together and talk about them, so I don't know that there was like a formal group. But Henry did have a reputation as a forward-thinking patron of science, and that was well earned. Alchemy, in particular, was a passion for Henry, though it wasn't just about turning lead into gold. For him and many of his contemporaries, alchemy was a way to explore the mysteries of nature and the universe. This intellectual curiosity set Henry apart from many of his peers who viewed science with suspicion or outright disdain. Henry's intellectual pursuits were only one part of his story. His connection to the Gunpowder Plot in 1605 plunged him into a far darker chapter. At the center of this drama was Henry's cousin, Sir Thomas Percy, who was one of the key conspirators in the plan to blow up Parliament. Sir Thomas had been in Henry's employ for years, first as a rent collector at Sion House, and then later as one of the king's bodyguards, a position that Henry had secured for him without requiring the standard oath of loyalty. This link to Sir Thomas was enough to make Henry a suspect. It didn't help that another of his servants, Dudley Carleton, had leased a building next to the House of Lords, the very spot the plotters used to access the cellars. To make matters worse, Thomas Harriot, who of course was very close to Henry, had reportedly cast a horoscope for King James, leading some to speculate that Henry dabbled in more than just science. Of course, it was illegal to cast a horoscope for the monarch. That was what had gotten John Dee imprisoned under the reign of Mary I, because you couldn't speculate about the death of the monarch. And John Dee had done that about Mary and Princess Elizabeth. That got him thrown into the Tower. So the idea was that Thomas Harriot was doing this too. They were thinking about when the king might die, et cetera, et cetera. So Sir Thomas Percy was killed during the government's raid on the conspirators, and he took many secrets to his grave. For Henry, this was both a blessing and a curse. While there was no concrete evidence tying him directly to the plot, his association with Thomas Percy and his outspoken critiques of James I made him an easy scapegoat. Following the discovery of the Gunpowder Plot, Henry Percy was arrested and imprisoned in the Tower. Although the evidence was circumstantial, his connections, his failure to enforce the oath of loyalty were enough to warrant a punishment. The government likely suspected that even if Henry wasn't directly involved, he had at least turned a blind eye to the conspirators' activities. Henry's imprisonment was harsh, but far from unbearable. He had immense wealth, so he could pay to live in relative comfort. He even installed a covered bowling alley within the tower's walls. He occupied the Martin Tower, a space he transformed into a hub of intellectual activity. His time in the Tower brought him into regular contact with Walter Raleigh, who had also been imprisoned there, and he was imprisoned in what was called the Garden Tower because he made a garden out of it. So together they would discuss scientific theories and smoke tobacco and continue their intellectual pursuits. Thomas Harriot remained a close collaborator during this time, visiting Henry in the Tower and sharing his groundbreaking astronomical observations. Harriot's work with telescopes and his maps of the moon continued to push the boundaries of scientific discovery, and Henry took a lot of pride in the fact that he was supporting these efforts. While he was imprisoned, Henry maintained his patronage of a number of scholars and scientists, so he continued to support this learning. Despite his relatively privileged conditions, his imprisonment came with a hefty fine, £30,000. This staggering sum was eventually reduced to £11,000, but the financial burden, combined with the loss of his offices and status, marked a significant decline in his political influence. After 17 years in the Tower, he was finally released in 1621 as part of a broader amnesty for political prisoners. By this time, his reputation had largely been rehabilitated. The evidence linking him to the Gunpowder Plot had always been tenuous at best, and most of his contemporaries viewed his punishment as unjust and vindictive. In his later years, he retired to his estates and continued his scholarly pursuits, and that is about when he started earning the nickname of the Wizard Earl, which showed his curiosity, his forward-thinking approach to the mysteries of the natural world. He passed away on November 5th, 1632, which is ironically the anniversary of the Gunpowder Plot. So who knows whether he was really guilty of being part of the Gunpowder Plot or not. There's a lot of evidence that he knew the people who were. So I don't know, he may not have been the villain, but he certainly hung out with people who wanted to kill the king and blow up Parliament and kill everybody and say, it would have been a pretty bad scene. He paid the price for being caught in the crosswinds of history. So there you go, a little bit about Henry Percy, the Wizard Earl. If you made it to this point in the video and you enjoyed it, I sure would appreciate a press of that like button. It helps to feed the algorithm and get our content to even more people. And I also hope I earned your subscription to my channel where I put out videos like this on the regular. If you want to keep binging Tudor content, here's the episode I did on Tudor astronomy. Super interesting. Here's a video that YouTube thinks you'll like. Thanks so much for being here. Thank you for watching. Remember, you are deeply loved. I'm so glad I share the planet with you. I'll be back soon. Don't forget to drink your water, friend. All right. Bye-bye.